Hey guys, my name is Mark Law and I'm the creator of Rational Wine, Consult Wine and 7 Key Wine Concepts. In the previous video we spoke about vinification. In this video I'm going to go on the other side and talk about viticulture. This is going to be a very big topic, but don't worry, I'm going to be focusing just on the factors that I feel are more important to you as an everyday wine drinker. And I'll be again reducing the technical jargon as much as possible, but there will be a few key terms that will be introduced to you. This is because if you pick up a bottle and read the wine label, or you go to a vineyard and the winemaker is speaking to you and you recognize some of these terms, this is going to help you judge the style of the wine. A lot of what I'll be covering is related to climate and all the factors that affect it, things like water, altitude, slope, soil, and so on. But before I go into that, I want to talk about today's main character, and that is the grapevine. Many winemakers will tell you that the wine is made in the vineyard, which means taking care of your vines so that they're healthy, so that they can grow the best fruit, which will go into the best wine. First, it's important to remember that the grapevine is a living thing. So this might sound obvious, but just bear with me for a moment. It's a living thing, and just like people, it needs resources to survive. For a grapevine, these resources are sunlight, heat, water, and nutrients. So just to give you an image, imagine you're a guy stuck at home. You've got a pantry full of instant ramen, soft drinks, you've got sports streaming on your television and internet 24/7. You're not going to try very hard at life. And if the grapevine has plenty of resources, it's going to behave in a very similar way. It's going to get comfortable, it's going to think, now's a good time to chill out and relax, and it's going to spread and grow more leaves instead of making grapes. Basically, it gets lazy. Now, living things don't just want to survive, they also want to reproduce. So now you imagine you've run out of ramen and soft drinks, and the television and the internet are down. So now you're more encouraged to leave the comfort of your own home. You're going to seek more resources. You might even decide to work out and work off that beer belly. You're going to go to the library and educate yourself maybe, and this might improve your chances of finding a life partner. So we can walk around and travel and relocate, but the grapevine is stuck where it is. So during bad times, when these resources become scarce, it's going to think to itself, "Oh my god, I'm going to die!" So instead of putting its resources into growing leaves, it's going to redirect them into making grapes. And the idea is that these grapes will then get eaten by birds, which will then fly away and dump the seeds of those grapes onto a new location where, hopefully, these resources are more plentiful. And this is where the winemaker has inserted themselves in the process. We've learned to simulate times of hardship for the grapevine, and by analyzing many factors, we then decide where exactly we want to plant our vineyard. The grapevine then follows its natural programming and it produces grapes for us, which we then turn into wine. Let's talk about climate. In my opinion, this is by far the most important topic when it comes to picking up the bottle, reading the label, getting that information, and figuring out the style of the wine from that. In general, when we talk about climate, you've got 3 types: maritime, Mediterranean, and continental. Let's start with maritime. Just by hearing that word, you can already imagine oceans, ships, generally mild weather. It's not too cold or too hot, but in some months of the year you do experience very heavy rain. If you're thinking of a city, maybe I'm thinking about London. I've never been, but it's got a reputation for having quite dreary weather. Otherwise, it's pretty boring. How about a Mediterranean climate? What do you imagine when you hear the word Mediterranean? I imagine Mediterranean islands, beaches, fresh seafood, lots of sunshine, and again, the weather is quite moderate. There's not too extreme between hot and cold, and you do still get rainy days, but probably fewer than in London. Maybe you can imagine somewhere in southern Italy or the Greek islands, places where you would go on holiday, sit back, relax, and sip on a nice fresh glass of Prosecco or Retsina. Now let's talk about continental climates. think about what a continent is. It's a very large landmass and you are in the middle of it. You'll often find deserts in the middle of large landmasses, and if you've never been in a desert, you should know that the days are very hot, but the nights are very cold. So there is an extreme range of temperatures in the desert compared to maritime and Mediterranean climates. And there's also much less rainfall as well. So of course the regions we're concerned about when it comes to vineyards and winemaking, they're not found in deserts, but it's a useful image to keep in mind. If you're looking at a vineyard that's in the middle of a large landmass and it's far away from the ocean, you are probably dealing with a continental climate. Now let's have a look at a map of the world. Focus on two things, the poles and the equator. So you might have noticed that there's a lot of ice at the North and South poles, so from this you can already assume that the weather is going to be very cold. Now at the tropics here, that's where the equator lies, and this is where you experience tropical weather. And what do you imagine when you think about the word tropical? It's sunny, it's hot, it's humid, and occasionally you get tropical storms. So in both cases, the environment is too extreme for the grapevine to grow the way that we want it to. So by process of elimination, you'll understand that the quality wine regions of the world lie in between these two extremes. To be precise, it's between the 30th and 50th parallel in the northern and southern hemispheres. So just by looking at a map of the world, you can already begin to get a sense of where a vineyard is located and what the climate might be like. And that's very important when you pick up a bottle, look at the label, you see the origin, and that's going to help you make an educated guess on what the wine will be like inside. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's start with the Mosel region of Germany. So looking at the map, this happens to be in the middle of the continent of Europe, so you could safely assume that it's a continental climate. Secondly, it's located quite close to the 50th parallel, closer to the North Pole, which means it's going to be quite cool. So from these two factors alone, you can already assume that it's a cool continental climate. What does this mean? There's less heat, less rainfall, resources which a grapevine needs to grow and flourish. So you'll find that vineyards there will have a difficult time reaching full ripeness. It's going to take much longer. The second example is the Margaret River region in Western Australia. So of course Australia is a continent, but the Margaret River is not located in the middle, it's located on the edge, close to the ocean. So this is a mitigating factor. It's also located closer to the 30th parallel in the southern hemisphere, which means it's going to have much warmer weather. It's much more likely to be a warm Mediterranean climate, which means it's going to have a lot more access to sunshine, to heat, rainfall. The vineyard is going to have no problem flourishing. In fact, the winemaker might have to take measures to cut back on the resources, so the vineyard will be more focused on making grapes rather than leaves. Let's talk about some of the other mitigating factors when deciding a region's climate. So the first is proximity to water. We did touch upon this in the previous example. The Margaret River of Western Australia is not continental, it's Mediterranean because it's close to the ocean. And it doesn't have to be an ocean, we can have rivers and lakes. Even in the Mosel, there is a river that runs through, and this actually helps to reflect sunlight onto the vineyards, which gives it more resources with which it can grow. And large bodies of water will also retain and store heat during the summer months, and when it gets cold in the winter, that heat will slowly be released onto the vineyards which are growing nearby. So it's like a battery which gives the vineyard energy just as it needs it the most. And a very dramatic example of this is the Gulf Stream, which actually brings warm water up from the Gulf of Mexico and onto coastal Europe. And this actually brings warm weather to that area. And if you don't have the Gulf Stream, the place would practically freeze over. The next factor is altitude. Think about a snow-capped mountain. The higher you go up, the colder it's going to get. A good example of this is in Mendoza, Argentina. It's close to the 30th parallel, so normally it would be a very warm region, but the mitigating factor here is altitude. Some of the highest vineyards in the world are found in Mendoza. They often are found above 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. And a rule of thumb I learned is every 100 meters you go up, the temperature drops on average 0.6 degrees Celsius. 1,000 meters, that's 6 degrees. If you imagine the air conditioning in your home, you change that by 6 degrees up or down, you're going to notice. And the vineyards are going to be exposed to this difference for its entire life, so you can imagine it's going to have some effect on how it's going to grow. High altitude also means more exposure to sunlight, which can seem a bit paradoxical, but it's definitely something to think about. So it's cold and getting more sunlight. There's less of one resource and more of another one, so keep that in mind. While we're talking about altitude, we should also talk about mountain ranges, because even if vineyards aren't planted at altitude, the presence of a mountain range nearby can have a very clear effect on the growing environment. A classic example of this is in Alsace in France, on the border with Germany. There is the Vosges mountain range, which actually redirects rain clouds and stops too much rainfall from going onto the vineyards. This is called a rain shadow effect. The next factor is slope. If you ever get the chance to visit some of the wine regions of the world, you'll notice that many of the vineyards are planted on slopes. A vineyard on a slope is going to receive a different amount of sunlight compared to a vineyard planted on flat land. Slopes also protect vines from getting too much water. When it rains, the water runs down the slope, but if there is a vineyard at the bottom of that slope, it's going to become waterlogged and you're going to have too much of that resource. This also happens with air during cold weather. Cold air is denser than warm air, so it's going to flow down and the vineyards on the slope will not become frozen. On the other hand, if there is a vineyard at the bottom of that hill, the cold air is going to pool up. Those vines might get frozen, they'll become damaged, they might even get killed. Now you've decided to plant your vineyard on a slope, we have to think about what direction that slope is going to be facing. This is called the vineyard's aspect. If you think about the equator again, it's usually quite warm because that's where the sun shines most of the time. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, if you have a slope facing south towards the equator, it's going to receive more sunshine. The opposite is true. If you're in the southern hemisphere and your aspect faces north, you will also receive more sunshine. And the east-west direction is something to think about as well, because of course the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. If you have an east-facing aspect, you will get that morning sunshine, but it's possible you're in an area where the east is blocked by some mountain range, in which case a west-facing aspect might be more helpful to you. If you ever visit a vineyard and the winemaker tells you that this slope produces better fruit than that slope, or this parcel produces better than that parcel, this is probably one of the reasons why. Finally, let's talk about soil. Of course, a grapevine also needs nutrients to survive, and what nutrients are available will depend on what soil type it's being grown on. We've got clay, sand, chalk, limestone, gravel, slate, and then you can look at what elements they're made of. We've got silicon, calcium, iron, but we should pay more attention to the water retention properties of the soil, and this is mainly determined by the size of the particles. You've got gravel and sand. Imagine if it suddenly rained, that water is going to run straight through. But on the other hand, you've got clay, which is going to get more wet and sticky as it absorbs more water. So when choosing the right place to plant your vineyard, we want a balance between these water retention properties. You want enough water for your vineyard so it can survive, but you also want drainage properties so that it doesn't get too much water and it's actually focused on producing fruit rather than leaves for your wine. Other than water, soil can also manage heat and sunlight. If you've got large slate slabs or gravel, these can absorb heat during the day, and at night it will release that heat back up to the vineyards just to moderate the temperatures. On the other hand, you've got clay, which is very good for keeping vines cool and supplied with water, and this can be very important if you happen to be experiencing drought. That's all I wanted to talk about today. I did skip through a lot of material again. I did not talk about macro versus meso versus microclimate. I didn't talk about crossings, hybrids, grafting, rootstocks, diseases, pests, trellising systems, pruning, canopy management, biodynamic and organic viticulture. I hope I covered the more important aspects, and hopefully that will help you to pick out wines in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Please hit like, subscribe, share it with your friends. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below or send me a direct message or an email. Cheers and see you again soon.